He was called Flawless. You? With this pathetic weapon? What did you do to me?
Perfection is a lie.
You didn't win. You ruined me.
The Korgath Arena pulsed like a living organ, its walls rippling with the slow, deliberate rhythm of some ancient creature's breath. It was not mere stone or metal that shaped this place, but a fusion of biology and architecture, an immense structure grown rather than built. The ceiling arched high above, translucent membranes allowing the dim, dying light of a distant red sun to filter through. The air was thick, humid, carrying the acrid scent of old blood and something deeper, something alive. At the center of the arena, standing atop the undulating flesh-metal floor, was Virak the Flawless. His six-limbed form stood tall, armored in sleek black chitin, his every movement betraying a lifetime of discipline. He was the pinnacle of Jair Khan evolution, a warrior bred for nothing but perfection in combat. His victories stretched across the stars, a trail of broken bodies and shattered wills left in his wake. The crowd, a seething mass of alien species from countless worlds, had gathered in the thousands to witness his latest display. They lined the towering organic terraces, their voices a mix of roars, clicks, and guttural chants. Some had come to honor him, others to see a challenger defy him and fail spectacularly, but none doubted the outcome. Virak never lost. He had invited the strongest of every race willing to stand before him, and so far they had all fallen. The Vraxis warlord, a mountain of flesh and horned armor, had lasted mere seconds before his spine was severed with a single precise strike. The Human Duelist, with her 6 shimmering blades, had been carved apart in a blur of motion she had not even seen coming. The biomechanical Zelvor warrior had fought longest, its body capable of regenerating damage that would have felled any organic being. But regeneration meant nothing when your limbs were severed faster than they could reform. Now there was only one challenger left, the human. Virak's mandibles clicked in amusement as the final combatant stepped forward. The human was unimpressive. He lacked the natural armor of the Vraxis, the additional limbs of the Jiggle, the mechanical augmentation of the Zelvor. His body was small, wrapped in a simple dark tunic, his exposed flesh smooth and soft-looking. No visible fangs, no claws, just a lean bipedal frame, his breathing calm and measured. His weapon, a single-edged curved blade, was even more pitiful. No plasma discharge, no phase-shifting edge, no integrated neural link, just polished steel. Virak exhaled sharply, his mandibles spreading in an approximation of a grin. The crowd mirrored his amusement, laughter rippling through the arena in a dozen different frequencies. He had fought humans before. Their combat was predictable, reliant on crude strength, on instinct over calculation. He had seen them fight with desperation, lashing out like wounded beasts rather than warriors, and this one standing so still, so composed, it was laughable. Virak tilted his head, amusement clear in his voice. Do you understand where you stand, human? This is no duel of equals. This is a lesson in your species' inferiority. The human said nothing. His eyes, dark and unreadable, remained locked on Virak. There was no fear there, no hesitation. Virak flexed his upper arms, his twin dueling blades unfolding from his forearms with a sharp crook. Their edges, honed to molecular precision, caught the dim arena light. He had perfected their use over centuries, had slain entire legions with their speed. With these weapons, he was untouchable. He stepped forward, lowering himself into a stance so deeply ingrained in his species that it was instinct. A predator's posture, one honed over countless battles. The ground beneath him pulsed in anticipation. "Draw your weapon, little thing," Virak said, his mandibles clicking in mockery. "Entertain me before you die." The human still did not speak. He only moved, a single step, his hand on the hilt, the whisper of steel leaving its sheath. Virak lunged, the air between them split. Pain exploded through Virak's body. He stumbled, skidding to a halt. The arena seemed to tilt beneath him. His vision flickered, confused as he looked down. His own blood, thick and black, dripped onto the floor. A wound. The human had struck first. Silence gripped the arena. The laughter died. The crowd, once brimming with amusement, had gone utterly still. Virak's mandibles twitched. His mind reeled, trying to comprehend what had just happened. No one had ever drawn first blood against him. His speed was unmatched, his reflexes beyond mortal comprehension. And yet, he had not even seen the strike land. His eyes lifted, locking onto the human. He was still standing in the same place, blade extended, blood sliding down the edge in slow, deliberate drips. He had not moved again. There had been no flourish, no wasted motion. Just a single, clean cut, perfectly placed, impossibly fast. Virak's chest tightened. The wound burned. Not like a simple gash. Something deeper, something worse. For the first time in his long, undefeated life, he felt it. Dread. Pain. Virak had not known true pain in decades. His body, engineered by generations of selective evolution and hardened by years of battle, was designed to endure. Yet now, something was wrong. The wound was small, just a shallow cut across his upper torso, the edges precise and clean. It should have been insignificant, a scratch unworthy of attention. But the moment the human's blade had touched his flesh, a terrible sensation had bloomed beneath his exoskeleton. It did not feel like a simple injury. It felt like violation. The pain was spreading, crawling outward from the wound. His carapace, which should have sealed itself instantly, was slow. The edges of the cut trembled as if his own body were unsure how to heal. A wrongness festered beneath the surface, something deeper than the wound itself. Virak exhaled sharply, forcing himself back into focus. This was no time for hesitation. He straightened, adjusting his posture, his four eyes narrowing at the human. The challenger still stood where he had before, blade held loosely at his side, utterly silent. There was no mockery in his stance, no arrogance, just the same unnatural, unshakable calm. Virak ground his mandibles together. Impressive, he admitted, rolling his shoulders, ignoring the lingering burn. But not enough. The human did not answer. Virak charged. This time he moved with intent, a blur of motion faster than any organic being should be capable of. His blades flashed forward, a storm of precise, calculated strikes, each one honed to pierce flesh, sever tendons, carve through bone before his opponent could react. He had slaughtered thousands with these techniques. Against him, slower creatures had no chance, except none of his strikes landed. The human moved. Not like other duelists, not like anything Virak had ever seen. It was not speed alone, nor was it simple reflex. The human did not evade so much as cease to be where the attack was aimed. Each strike slid past empty air, missing by mere centimeters, as if the swordsman knew exactly where each blow would land before Virak had even committed to the movement. It was impossible. Virak twisted, adapting, altering his angles, pressing forward with relentless aggression. His twin blades wove intricate arcs of death, slashing and stabbing, each movement calculated to leave no room for escape. Yet the human remained untouched. Then, a whisper of steel, a second cut. Virak felt it before he saw it, an icy hot sensation slicing through the chitin of his lower right arm. He stumbled back, reflexively recoiling, his mind screaming in disbelief. His right blade clattered to the ground, his fingers no longer responding. He looked down. His hand was dangling. The cut had been so precise that the limb had nearly severed, connected only by a strip of tissue. His own body spasmed at the injury, twitching unnaturally. The wrongness from the first wound had spread here too. The edges of his wound moved, not healing, not closing, but shifting, as if the cells themselves had forgotten what they were supposed to be. Virak's breath hitched. He had never lost a hand in battle. The human exhaled softly, adjusting his stance, his expression as unreadable as before. His sword, thin and simple, gleamed with a line of Virak's blood. He held it with ease, his fingers relaxed, his posture completely at peace. Virak staggered back, his mind scrambling for explanation. This is not how humans fight. He had studied their combat styles. He had fought them. They were brash, desperate creatures relying on brute strength or predictable formations. They did not, could not, fight like this. He gritted his mandibles, forcing the pain aside. He could still fight. He would still fight. With a growl, he lunged again, this time using every ounce of his speed, his remaining blade slicing in a blinding arc. A third cut. Virak's movement faltered. His left leg buckled. His body was failing. The wound on his leg was minor, just another clean, simple cut. But something was happening beneath his exoskeleton. His limbs were not responding the way they should. His muscles twitched, spasming, as though some unseen force was working against him. He stumbled, struggling to stand. His breathing grew uneven. And the human, he had still barely moved. Virak's vision blurred for a moment. His focus wavered. Number. He was Virak the Flawless. He had stood upon the corpses of countless foes. He had dueled the greatest warriors in the known galaxy and never lost. This human was an anomaly, a fluke, nothing more. Yet his own body betrayed him. His wounds should have been nothing, yet they deepened, changed. The edges of the cuts had softened, no longer clean but warping, moving in ways that defied biology. The tissues beneath his exoskeleton quivered, as if something inside was shifting. He felt his own form resisting him. Virak's breathing became ragged. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, too fast, too uneven. His limbs felt heavier, wrong, the joints bending at unfamiliar angles. He gripped his remaining weapon tighter, his mandibles grinding together. The human watched him, silent, waiting. Virak felt something he had not known in his entire life. Dread. And somewhere deep inside his body, something moved. Virak fell back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His body no longer obeyed him. Every movement felt wrong, as though his limbs were not his own. The pain was not ordinary. It was not the sharp agony of a duel, not the familiar sting of a wound that could be ignored. This was something else. It radiated outward from every cut the human had inflicted, burrowing into his flesh, changing him. His limbs twitched involuntarily, muscles locking and unlocking at unnatural angles. His right hand, no, the remains of it, shuddered violently, the fingers convulsing before curling inward like withering roots. He tried to flex them, to command them. They did not respond. Number, this was not healing. This was corruption. Virak's remaining blade trembled in his grip. His legs refused to steady beneath him, the ground beneath his feet seeming to shift, not because of the arena's organic movement, but because his own body no longer knew how to stand. He turned his gaze downward. His exoskeleton was wrong. Where the human's blade had struck, the once impermeable plating had softened. What should have been hardened chitin had become something pliable. It pulsed beneath his fingers when he pressed against it. The edges of the wounds no longer bled normally. Instead, they rippled, the flesh undulating like something that had forgotten its original form. His lower right arm, where the cut had nearly severed his limb, no longer looked like his. The carapace had split apart, revealing not muscle or bone, but something else entirely. The tissue was shifting, writhing, folding in on itself in a grotesque attempt to become something new. His hand was already gone, no longer a severed limb, but a mass of tissue that stretched and contracted, as if unsure whether it should exist at all. The fingers had fused together into a shapeless lump, the claws melting away like wax under heat. He felt it moving, twisting of its own accord. Virak choked back a growl. His other wounds pulsed in time with it. His form was unraveling. This was no normal blade. No simple steel could do this. His mind raced through everything he knew about human weapons. Was it poisoned? Some form of molecular destabilizer? No, it could not be. He had been cut before, had suffered worse wounds than these, and none had caused his body to lose its identity. It was something else, something ancient. His vision wavered. His heart pounded too fast, too irregularly. His species had perfect control over their own bodies. Every movement, every reaction was precise. But now his limbs twitched without command. His left foot spasmed. His mandibles locked and unlocked as though controlled by an outside force. And the human was still standing there, still silent, still watching. Virak's breath hitched. The crowd had gone silent. Thousands of eyes from hundreds of species bore witness to the impossible. They had come expecting a spectacle, another victory for Vierak, the Flawless. But now they watched something else unfold, something unnatural. A single thought bloomed in Vierak's mind, its presence unwelcome and undeniable. This is not a duel. This was something older, something beyond the contests of warriors. He had stepped into the arena to prove his superiority. Instead, he was being undone. Vierak staggered again, his vision narrowing. His breath came in uneven gasps, his own body rebelling against him. The sensation spread deeper. He felt his spine twist, an unnatural pull rippling through his frame. His ribs, no, his chitin, were no longer solid. They moved beneath his skin, flexing and warping, trying to decide what they were supposed to be. He could feel the changes creeping up his neck, a sickening sensation of shifting being threading through his veins. His own shape was betraying him. He tried to raise his weapon again, but his arm spasmed violently, bending backward at an impossible angle. His vision flickered. The human had not moved. Vierak shuddered, feeling his body turn alien beneath his own skin. For the first time in his long life, he felt something far worse than pain. A terror that had nothing to do with losing. A terror that came from realizing that the worst had already begun. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. Vierak collapsed to his knees, his body no longer his own. The arena around him blurred, its breathing walls, the silent, frozen crowd, the distant, pulsing glow of the red sun above. Everything faded into the periphery. There was only the pain now, only the writhing inside him, only the slow, creeping wrongness that had taken root in his very being. His limbs, his perfect, honed limbs, crafted by evolution and sculpted through endless war, were no longer limbs at all. His exoskeleton had softened to the consistency of raw muscle, black chitin unraveling into something that pulsed and twitched without his command. His right hand had already ceased to exist, replaced by a formless, shifting mass of flesh that breathed on its own, like an open wound gasping for air. His left arm was merging into his torso, the armor plates folding inward, drawn together by unseen forces. His legs were no better, bones and joints twisting, bending wrong, as if his body could no longer recall what shape it was meant to hold. His own form had betrayed him. Vierak tried to rise, tried to force his body back into control, but the act was futile. His own weight worked against him, his muscles contracting in ways they shouldn't, fighting themselves. He could feel his chest pulling inward, his ribs shifting places, his breathing ragged and uneven. His mandibles were fusing together, locking in an unnatural, grotesque smile. His vision blurred. His eyes, once the sharpest in the arena, capable of tracking even the fastest of movements, were failing him. The edges of his sight pulsed with darkness, the world folding, breaking apart at the edges. Across from him, the human stood still, his sword now lowered, the blade slick with Vierak's blood. Unmoving, watching, his face so calm, so utterly without expression, burned itself into Vierak's mind. There was no hatred there, no satisfaction, no pride in victory, only a quiet, knowing acceptance. Vierak tried to speak, tried to demand an explanation, to ask why. His voice failed him. What emerged from his throat was a broken, wet sound, half a snarl, half a whimper. He could feel something shifting beneath his jaw, his own vocal cords reshaping, deciding on their own what they should be. Terror crawled through what remained of his mind. This wasn't death. This was worse. He was still alive, still conscious, still aware. His thoughts remained untouched, trapped within a body that was no longer his own. He could feel everything, the slow decay, the horrific, uncontrollable becoming that was taking hold of him. He was changing, and he did not know into what. The crowd did not cheer. They did not move. Thousands of warriors, spectators, and nobles, creatures from the farthest reaches of the galaxy, stood frozen in horror. The greatest duelist of their age, the legend of 100 battlefields, was no longer a warrior. He was something else now, something they could not name. The arena, which had witnessed the deaths of so many before, refused to consume him. Its living walls, once pulsing with hunger, remained still. Even the ground beneath him, made from the flesh of something ancient, seemed repulsed by what he was becoming. Virak's gaze snapped back to the human. His breath hitched. The swordsman was stepping forward, one step, then another. Each movement was slow, deliberate, like the inevitable passing of time. The human raised his blade once more, angling it downward, preparing for the final stroke. Virak tried to move, tried to fight, but his body was no longer his own. His arms were gone now, merged into his torso, or perhaps absorbed into something deeper. His legs twisted into new shapes, folding in on themselves, betraying even the memory of their former function. His vision darkened further, his body collapsing in upon itself, warping, folding, shifting. The sword came down. Virak did not feel the blade land, only the silence that followed. The transformation stopped. He was still aware, still conscious, but something had changed. The pain was gone. The movement had ceased. His body, whatever remained of it, no longer thrashed or twisted. He was still. Virak's mind swam in the silence. Had he died? Had the humans spared him? Had the arena itself rejected him? He did not know. But he understood one thing. He had not been defeated. He had been undone. The human exhaled, stepping back, his blade once again clean, though no one had seen him wipe it. Then finally, he spoke. His voice was quiet, calm. Perfection is a lie. Virak could not respond. He no longer had the mouth to do so. The swordsman turned, walking away, his presence fading into the vast silence of the arena. Behind him, Virak, what remained of him, lay still, unrecognizable. A thing that had once been perfect, a thing that would never be anything again. The silence lingered. Then slowly the spectators began to leave. There was nothing left to see.